Okay, so we're going to get into the first substantive agenda item at number 4, which is a report and update around serious and violent crime. So,
okay.
Yeah, I'll hand over to you.
All right, thank you. So, as you've said, the purpose of the report is to provide an update on how we in West Yorkshire Police are delivering against the Serious Violent Crime Strategy 2018. I'll try and pull out the highlights and the things that I think are important as opposed to reading through the whole of the report. I think it's fair to say that after a decade of some decline in serious violent crime across the UK and internationally, we have seen a rise in serious violent crime across the board. And of course, there is suggestion that there is a reduction in enforcement, in health treatment, in interventions such as youth clubs and diversionary activities for young people. But I think also worthy of note are other issues, societal issues, such as the use of smartphones, which have increased dramatically over the last decade, the membership of gangs online and retaliation videos and how they feature and sometimes provoke serious violence. Cocaine use and its increase can be attributed to violence, and also social norms which have changed over years, people just being far more comfortable in displaying outspoken and aggressive behaviour. I think that, coupled with the fact that our changes in the way that we record crime also has led us to recording much more of that crime that ordinarily might not have been recorded previously. And so that does help in giving us much more of an idea about where this crime's happening and helping us to problem solve it, but also does add to those increases that we've seen across the board, not just in West Yorkshire. There was a recent violent crime conference held by the Home Office in 2018, and I think one of the notable things there, and the visits that we've made ourselves in local policing and our knife crime lead has made to Scotland, is the really good work that Scotland have done over probably the last decade actually in their violence reduction unit in Glasgow, which was, you know, really held up as being a place that really struggled in terms of serious violence, very serious violence in fact. And the way that they have tackled and reduced serious violence by big percentages is by a really clear public health focus as much as a criminal enforcement focus. And that was very much the message from that violent crime conference that was held in 2018. And as a result of that, we have tried, obviously people may or may not understand just how wide-ranging the topic of serious violence is. It covers everything from the very, very serious violence and the death of people, through to knife crime, through to serious assaults, through to domestic abuse and everything in between. So it really is a very wide-ranging topic, which clearly doesn't just need one specific focus in order to problem solve it. So we have taken a slightly different approach than usual, and instead of our usual prevent, protect, prepare and pursue element of how we would normally generate a plan, we've utilised the learning from the Scottish experience and the public health lead, and we have used some public health terminology in trying to make better sense of that 4P plan, to try really to include terminology that partnerships understand as much as we do, to try and get some buy-in there. So when I talk about interrupting the transmission, I'm talking about preventing people and persuading people to steer away from this kind of behaviour. And we're looking there at things like predictive modelling as to where things might take place in the first instance, thinking about alternative methods to interrupt offences taking place, so things like gang mentors, for example, in steering people away from that kind of violence in the first instance. And then using social media platforms in a positive way, so really, you know, being very proactive in liaising with social media providers in the first instance to take things down when they are harmful, but also about providing avenues where we have positive messages that are going out to predominantly young people in order to prevent this from taking place in the first instance. In terms of protecting, so preventing future spread, if we're looking at it as kind of a disease or an epidemic, then this is about early intervention. It's about things like youth zones. It's things like Red Thread, which is obviously something that's happening in some hospitals across the UK, where we are intervening with people at a very specific time in their life when they've been attacked and they're at their most vulnerable in a positive way in terms of understanding the risk that they're putting themselves into and being open to help in terms of behavioural change. The third element in terms of prepare, that's about changing and challenging norms. So that's about education, awareness, the kind of not in my neighbourhood, challenging the lower levels of violence so that they don't escalate into something more serious. And then the pursue is partly about data and monitoring, about an accurate understanding of the problem, albeit I accept that there we do come into, it's very much a policing element there around the enforcement and making sure that we swiftly arrest people who are responsible for these kind of crimes and put problem-solving occurrences in where there are particular locations which are causing us particular concern. So this move away from using this pure enforcement language is trying, as I said before, to engage key partners in the part that they play. We do have a comprehensive coordination strategy, I think it's best to term it as, because as I said, there are many different facets to this which are being led by different people within the organisation. And in local policing we have a coordination strategy which is pulling all those things together to ensure that we don't duplicate. The Early Intervention Youth Fund, you'll be aware of that we bid via this office for some of that money, and we were successful in getting some of that, and as part of that we are conducting a mapping exercise to understand the public sector interventions but also third sector and commission services, so that we understand what the gaps are in our interventions moving forward. And one of the key things that I've asked of the district commanders just very recently is if we're trying to really progress this public health focus in terms of a wider strategic problem-solving model with serious violence, is to look at how the different health and wellbeing boards are functioning across West Yorkshire at the moment, what our strategic link into those boards is, and how often those boards are currently talking about serious violent crime and some of the root causes of it within our communities. So there's lots of things that are ongoing. I've obviously attached the overarching strategy and then the action plan which falls out of each of the different elements of those for people to look at in more detail, but I think that's probably the key things that I would like to pull out of that paper.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure we have that attachment. I haven't seen it, but we'll pick up on that afterwards.
Right, I've got both papers there,
okay,
so yeah, I can forward them to you, that's fine.
Okay. So I will just touch on, as you've said, Catherine, within the report, some of the connecting work through this office before getting into questions. I think it's important around the sort of context. And obviously, serious violent crime, unfortunately, is very much in the news every day as a national issue, but obviously here as well in West Yorkshire. So obviously I have already asked the Chief Constable to review responses to the knife crime increases that we have seen. As you're probably aware, I now sit on the Home Office Serious Violence Task Force, which is chaired by the Home Secretary. And we've had a number of presentations there, actually, from education, for example, regarding exclusions from schools, the provision of pupil referral units out of mainstream education provision. I think these are all big issues that are having an impact and that we all need to have a better understanding of. So I will be meeting very shortly with the Children's Commissioner to look in a bit more detail about some joint work we might want to take forward. And I absolutely do support your comments there around health and wellbeing boards and the public health approach, because Red Thread, as he said, they actually gave a presentation at the last meeting. They are an organisation that's based in London mainly, but they are spreading their work to other parts of the country, and they're predominantly based in accident and emergency wards with outreach youth workers to try and steer, as we know, young people coming in with injuries, knife wounds, etc., into those areas. So I do welcome that, and that's potentially something. I know we have already discussed, actually, it's a partnership executive group. That's one of our internal meetings, and I know in Leeds in particular they are looking at some work with Red Thread about potential options on that moving forward. Obviously, periodically we've supported weapons amnesties, joint campaigns with West Yorkshire Police, and we will continue to do that. They have a place, absolutely, and we need to continue with that. Programme Precision, Op Precision, as you know, is something that the force, with partners and myself, have put in place around that wider partnership approach to tackling serious organised crime. There was a soft launch of that fairly recently, and hopefully we'll be saying more about the outcomes of some of that work in due course. I've also provided some funding through the Partnership Executive Group to Huddersfield University and the Leeds and Kirklees youth offending teams, exploring the linkage or potential linkage to the social media trends, and in fact it's been on the news this morning. So I've heard some of those articles, but there is no doubt that I think we all know that social media is playing a part in some of the reasons potentially why we are seeing increases, but having some proper robust evaluation and research I think is very important. So I will look forward to seeing what the outcome of that work is in due course. Also, the Safer Communities Fund, of course, which is the proceeds of crime monies, is a really welcome source of funding into our communities, and Grant Round 14, which happened last year, actually funded a number of projects. 49 groups, for example, received funding of over 200,000, looking at projects of tackling violent crime and intervention. So all that is really important at a real grassroots level. And also Grant Round 13, previous to that, looked at also violence and knife crime, and groups like the Leeds Street Team, the Street Doctors, the West Yorkshire Police Knife Crime Prevention Programme. All these are really important initiatives that we want to see making a difference. And as you've said, the Early Intervention Youth Fund, we were successful in receiving over £1,100,000 of that funding into a number of projects aimed at children and young people away from violent crime, and obviously we will monitor that work and have an update. Hopefully I know how that is going very shortly. I did also respond recently to the Home Secretary's announcement around the new powers to tackle knife crime, and whilst I did welcome that broadly, we all know that legislation alone isn't or can't be the answer, but it's, overall it was welcome. And then finally, I will be hosting a joint event with the Home Office very soon, as a Yorkshire and Humber event, but it will be in Leeds. We haven't actually agreed a venue yet, around bringing partners together to look at what more we need to do to tackle serious and violent crime, because in my view, some of the solutions have to come from the bottom up around the communities and the young people that are seriously at risk, and obviously some of the real tragic cases that we see when young people lose their lives in particular. So I think it was important to set that out, because there's an awful lot going on, but I don't think any of us can be in any way complacent about the work and our drive to tackle this collectively with our partners, and more particularly within our communities. So with that, I will now just sort of touch on some questions I wanted to cover as a result of the report.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be good if you could provide me with a strategy of the serious violence strategy, and tell me more about the aspects of the strategy and why it's being prioritised in the way you've described.
Okay. So, I mean, I've got a copy of it here, actually. We can forward it to you straight after the meeting for people to see. But when you do look at it, what you'll see is, initially when I described, you know, the kind of 5 or 6 key areas that fall underneath serious violent crime, they are depicted on this strategy, along with the district leads. And then, as I talk through those 4 different areas, there's got traditional 4P areas, which we tried to put a public health kind of spin on, if you like. They're all at the bottom of the strategy for you to read. So the kind of 6 main areas really are the county lines and organised crime group part of the work, which is being led by DCI Carl Galvin. Obviously links in with Operation Precision, Programme Precision, which you've already mentioned. All of these, they're almost like a Venn diagram. They do have lots of link overs, but this is the best way that they are able to be compartmentalised. There's knife crime. So Chris Gibson, Detective Superintendent at Leeds, is our operational lead on that, and he's doing an awful lot of work in terms of thinking about the early interventions, and we are linking in with Operation Sceptre in the coming weeks, where lots of the things that we did last year are now kind of business as usual, really. So lots of the test purchasing operations at shops, for example, we run via the neighbourhoods on a very regular basis, and part of that is about education. But there is a line in the sand to be drawn about when you've had your warning and you understand what you've done and the education's been given, and then we move on to enforcement and making sure that people can't sell things to younger members of communities anymore. Then there's the kind of gun crime and gang-related issues, which is led by DCI Jazz Khan in the Firearms Prevent team. There's clearly the homicide, which is sat with PS Crime and Nick Wallen. There's domestic abuse, there's that part of serious violence which is within the safeguarding unit, and there's lots of work that we're doing at the minute to try to understand and put in place interventions to look at changing offender behaviour in the first instance, but also helping victims and supporting victims to hopefully have the confidence to move on from relationships which are abusive for future. And then finally, and I suppose the biggest volume, if you like, and the thing that's most difficult to get a handle on, is the other stuff, if you like, which is the violence that happens in schools, in hospitals, in prisons, in mental health establishments, very regular, demand generators for us, quite often different people. There are things that we can do for sure around those strategic locations and problem solving and making it less likely that violence is going to happen, but some of this is down to the individuals that are within those settings and how we manage that in a wider sense, not just about the violence that they're exhibiting in those settings. So much of that work is being led by either Richard Close in local policing, or is being looked at by our demand review team.
Okay, thanks for that.
So I'll forward you a copy of that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So, I mean, it's page 3, Catherine, so I think you referred to it as a coordination strategy as well.
Yeah.
And it's I guess it's you might have already answered it, but it's that the sort of comprehensive action plan that is referred to within that paragraph as well. Because obviously what we've got here is quite a high level strategy.
So underneath that strategy, under each of those 6 areas, and again I can forward it to you, but sits, so you probably have to just see it on my screen there, a really comprehensive action plan which sits underneath those 4 with clear ownership, some timescales. That's not all about, some of that is partnership response clearly, and some of it's more long term, some of it's things that we can affect a little bit quicker. So again, I can forward you a copy of that, but you can have some reassurance that there is quite a specific action plan which falls under each of those 6 areas.
Okay. Yeah, and I think the emphasis is about bringing it together under one overarching strategy, because this is something I've raised with the Chief Constable, and it was actually referred to in a recent police and crime panel, and a commitment to do that. So, but I will be following through on that. Again, just looking at a sort of a more district level. So we have SPOCs, which are obviously key contacts within the districts. It's really, could you just describe the major benefits to having those people and specific points of contacts in place, and how that will better support our communities?
Yeah, okay, so whilst there are quite a lot of the things within the strategy that we can do at a force level, there are certain things and local differences that are better understood at that local level by the people that work there and work in partnership with local people and communities. That's why there is a Chief Inspector or a DCI link for this on each of the districts, and they will get their own bespoke performance information about their big demand locations in terms of not just violent crime but other areas as well, but we're talking about violent crime at the moment. So they'll get their top 10 locations. They'll also, we're starting to develop much more around the subjects and the victims as well, and then it is up to them then in their area of the business to try and problem solve at a local level with partners at that local level to try and reduce some of that demand. So that's why it's important that we have those local SPOCs, and that's what we use them for. And it's also important then that they then are drawn together in a coordinated way by Richard Close, and this is the purpose of having the overarching plan, so that if we have a specific district that tries something, for example, we do it in one district, we do it as a proof of concept, and if it works we roll it out across other districts, and if not we move on and we understand why it's not worked and we try something different. Yeah,
thanks for that. And actually just thinking about some of that national work that I'm involved in, so there are some bids coming forward into what's called the Police Reform Transformation Board, and there is one there's an able policing one in South Yorkshire that they're leaning on, which I hope we can certainly tap into given the proximity of that. But also I think Leicestershire have just recently submitted something as well around specifically the coordination around tackling violence, serious violence. And I just think whoever are leading on these projects, these are things that we, where it's appropriate and relevant, that we need to try and tap into, because ultimately it's funding that is top sliced from all our budgets to fund these things. So I can certainly pass on the information that hopefully might be useful.
Yeah, if you could. We're already linked in to the South Yorkshire stuff with the problem solving and neighbourhood work. Yeah. But I didn't know about the Leicestershire work, so if you could forward me that on, I'll make sure that we pick up on that.
Yeah, it's a new bid, so that's.
Good.
But I just mentioned it. Yeah,
good.
Thanks.
Great.
Also, there's also a reference to mapping at the bottom of page 3. Could you just explain, or do you know when that's likely to be completed and the gaps identified as a result of that work?
Well, this is part of the early intervention fund, So the map, we've actually got some fairly tight timescales with that, because I think the funding actually ends at the end of March. So we're on with the work. Quite a lot of that is dependent on information coming back from partner agencies, third sector agencies. So once all of that information, the ask has gone out, and we're waiting for the information to come back in, and then we should be able to pull that together and be able to say where our gaps are and where we've got some overlaps, where we could possibly save some money as well.
Okay, thank you. Jane, was there anything you wanted to?
Yeah, can I just ask about evaluation arrangements that you've put in place for the strategy, and how soon you'll know what impact has been made by the actions that you've outlined?
So I suppose there are there'll be different timescales for evaluation for the different parts of it, because different things have started at different times. But we'll run things through the usual, so things like precision, which are kind of the bigger ticket items, if you like, will be run through the PIR system within Programme of Change, as with other programmes that have been set up. Whereas, for example, some of the work on some of the strategic demand hotspots, for example, will be evaluated as we go in the Local Policing Governance Board, and we'll look at then putting things onto the What Works site, if it does, and if not, understanding why not, and developing something different.
Yeah.
So I suppose the evaluation will be done differently for different parts of the strategy.
Yeah. It would perhaps be good in future papers for us to see
Yeah,
that evaluation coming through.
Anything else, Jane? Yeah, I mean, as we've already mentioned, you know, this is going to be an area that will be a regular one that we need to keep our focus on, and do whatever we can collectively to not only work with our partners but also to try and better understand some of the drivers behind this. And it goes well beyond policing. Obviously it's education, health, a societal issue, but you know, it's one that when we look at the increases, and there clearly have been increases in West Yorkshire as well as nationally, then you know, it's something we absolutely must bear down on. So it will remain a big focus for us, I think, going forward. So was there anything else you wanted to add before?
No, I don't think so, thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for that.